Actually, just to, because my mind hops. Sorry, folks, my mind is one of those, like, it chases bunnies. Novels and screenplays. When we talk about, like, obviously novels, you have this long form to build out and play. So, screenplays, how do you drive into that?
Well, novels, the thing with novels, it's funny, I had 2 sports growing up. One was soccer, which is a blast. I played soccer when I was in diapers. Like, I come from a family where that, like, I was raised as if in a European family is the best way to describe that. So I was playing soccer nonstop. It's always fun. I've played in the middle of the Amazon basin. I've played on beaches in South America. I've played in Europe. I mean, I play anywhere you can pick up and play. And the other sport I had was pole vaulting. I pole vaulted in college. It's amazing, but you always think you could die, right? That's one of the templates, or one of the premises. If you're going to go pole vault, you might die, you know, and I broke a pole in college, and it's a scary, scary sport. But when it works, people say, is it fun? It's like, no, it's not fun. It's terrifying or triumphant. That's how I feel about novels. Like, it's just you. It's not soccer. There's not a team. You don't play backup. There's no safety net to it. In a novel, the novelist is everything, right? I'm the movie star. I'm hair and makeup. I'm the location scout. I'm the props master, right? I'm the director. I'm the cinematographer. Novelists, you have to do all of the things and fill them and somehow conduct this orchestra of all these different departments. Now, writing a screenplay, which is certainly no easier. It's not easier to write a single beautiful poem than to write a novel. It's not about what's easier or higher. But with screenplays, I do feel that there's a different set of challenges to that, in that now you're moving from 400 pages of final product to 110 pages with a lot of white on the page. And what a screenplay is, in certain regards, is a recipe. It's a roadmap to a project. It's an invitation to collaborate. And there's a lot of different stages. I mean, Philip is a master screenwriter, you know, well in his own right. But, you know, for me coming in from novels, the way I always look at it is there's these different drafts that you do. So the selling draft has to read and be, I think, magnificent and lyrical. And you have to do things like you have to tell the director how it's moving by visualizing it without giving any straight direction, right? Because if you start to say zoom here and pan here, like Francis Ford Coppola will come along and pat you on the head and be like, thanks, Spanky, but I've done this before. This ain't your job. So how you indent, how you capitalize, how you are on the page has to subtly suggest that. It's like an intimation of the direction. And also you want it to be beautiful if you're a proper screenwriter. I mean, when Philip writes a screenplay, it's beautiful to the level of the language, to how the words are on the page. Sometimes if there's a big reveal, we want to turn the page and it's at the top of the next page even. So there's all these ways that you're playing with it. And then when it's bought, then it's time to start to figure out often casting once you rewrite it. How do you beef up different characters? How do you make sure now that, you know, and this is great training for a novel, right? How is the 6th character on the call sheet going to be someone we can cast who's a recognizable name or a real piece of talent where there's meat? Because if you freeze a screenplay, you know, I learned a lot of this in TV. We used to do a pass on TV shows where we'd go through every character, every actor. We had their pictures up around the writer's room, and you make sure they have something to do in every scene. Because the last thing you're going to do is haul an actor out of their trailer to sit in a scene and stand there and blink and not say anything while the other characters interact. Because, you know, actors have talent and want to be useful and egos. And so you can't do it because they'll come up and complain at you. And that's fair, right? But the same thing's true in novels. If you freeze a novel at any point around one character, the whole rest of the story should rotate around them. How many of you have read Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are Dead, the great Tom Stoppard play? A wonderful play, one of our greatest playwrights, British playwright, he's amazing. And he basically writes the story of Hamlet from the 2 most insignificant characters in Hamlet, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. And so they're talking...
Guildenstern and Rosencrantz.
Okay, yes, apologies. Thank you, sir. But so he freezes it around them, so they'll be having a conversation, and behind the pillars in the background, Hamlet like rolls through sighing to be or not to be. So he takes the entirety of the play and makes it around them. And the title, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead,
Yeah.
is the direction when they die. Someone just comes in and says that. Like, that's how unimportant they are, is that their death is announced with that one sentence. So I think about that a lot. If I'm writing a character who's a bartender in one scene, how do you make that bartender three-dimensionalized? How do you bring a life to that bartender as if that's an actor who's coming out of her trailer and asking what her lines are for that scene? How do you have every character have a reality? So in screenwriting, we strive for that in a first selling draft, but in some ways the selling draft is more about, is mostly about the read and the story and the feel,
Right.
and then the real depth of the main characters. And then when it comes time to casting, you look for all the embellishment before you're going to start to submit to cast out those other parts. Then there's the production draft, right, where all of a sudden you're mapping the location. So screenplays evolve through there's an evolution process of screenplays. And often the production draft isn't that as much fun or as beautiful to read as the selling draft.
Well, a lot of times when you've got a production draft and they don't receive screenwriting credit, but really you've got a first AD, the first assistant director, and they're in charge of breaking the script down, they're in charge of scheduling it, what's going to be shot on what day, and they need to know who is in this scene. So when you're doing a sales draft, you're going for the pace of the read. Suddenly you have to, if
all of this character, all of that character, right, or just the location. You're spinning all these plates and you're the only one holding it, and if it goes wrong, the pole's going to break and you can snap your neck and die. That's how writing novels is. But when it works, you soar. When it works, it feels triumphant.
Cool. It makes me want to finish the novel that
I've been telling you.
Started along. Yeah, but the one that's closest is the one you said, that's the one with the space octopus, and you're like, don't do that.
I wish that was a joke.
It's not a joke. It's going to be great if I finish it. Let's talk a little bit about language and how we navigate writing in a politically charged time like now without compromising either the craft or the voice.
Okay.
Because that's tricky.
I've been thinking about this a lot. And for me, what the answer tacks back to is we have seen a dumping of everything into the political, right? So what clothes we wear, what brands we buy, what car we drive, what beer we drink, what movies we see, let alone who we vote for, right? Who's in our community, what church, cathedral, temple we go to, if we're secular, what schools we go to. Everything has become politicized. And that's a shame, because politics in some ways politics, I think, should be there to keep everything functioning. It shouldn't be sort of the highest human ideals that are nourishing and life-affirming to which we should be striving. And so I think in some ways what we've lost is we've had this dumping of everything into the political, where everybody has ceded their value set to politics and made them subservient. And I think one of the things that's essential is to have the codes, like Orphan X has a code, he has an assassin's code. I have a code as a novelist, and that code has to be higher than a political code or cultural code, because then I'm not just writing, I'm creating propaganda. I know what I think ahead of time. I'm teaching everyone a lesson. I'm being sanctimonious. And so I think it would be great if doctors would adhere to their highest code with the Hippocratic Oath. I think it would be great if lawyers and Supreme Court justices would answer to their highest oaths, that teachers could figure out what their value set and structures are as teachers. If we can remove that, then in a way, and churches, right, and temples and mosques, if everybody is returning to the basis of their code and value set, we could start to have a culture again where there's different sections of the symphony, but they're all able to harmonize because they're not all dumping discordantly into the same noise that's, making everyone's teeth grind. And so for me, it's very complicated. So I'm not a fan of sensitivity readers. But I also don't want to be reactionary in opposition to getting things right that are misstated. So to give an example, one of my predominant characters in the Orphan X series is a character called Aragon Uria. He's loosely based on, he shares the last name with a dear friend of mine, Luis Uria, who I think is one of our greatest Mexican-American writers. He was Pulitzer nominated for Devil's Highway. He is an incandescent talent. He's so talented, it makes your eyeballs hurt when you're reading him. And I grew up, I'm from California. I'm like, Mexican culture, Mexican-American culture is in my blood, it's in my family, it's in my community. I have a Mexican aunt, I had a Mexican girlfriend in high school. It's all around me. And so when that book came out, it was right after the big controversy with American Dirt. I don't know if you remember that. And so sensitivity readers were everywhere. And what was interesting is I found myself having a bit of a reactionary thing of like, I don't want somebody who's an expert in, or believes or professes to be an expert in cultural sensitivity to review my book. That doesn't seem like that's holding the code of my profession highest. But there was a natural creative solution to this for me, which was I want to make sure I get everything right. And that book was very, very heavily both Mexican and Mexican-American. And so when I finish a draft, I send it out to subject matter experts, right? I send it to an expert in guns and ordnance to check all my gun stuff. I send it to an expert world-class hacker to check all of the hacking. I send it to professors. I send it to doctors to make sure that when I'm injuring, maiming, and mutilating people, that I'm doing that in a manner that's anatomically correct. And I sent it to Luis, and I was like, hey man, what did I've been in touch with him all the way. What did I get wrong? It's like, oh, this slang word, do this, swear this way, not that way, right? Like, oh, this would be a cool tweak. That's not what they'd eat there. I want to get it right. I don't want to get it right to fulfill some predetermined notion of making all these characters sort of saintly and banal and generic. I want to get it right to have the full vibrancy of the culture that I love exposed in all of its brilliance and complexity and with all of its lightness and dark. And so it's very interesting because you see a lot of people jerking away, but it's like, look, don't get caught with your pants down for anything. I don't want to use a slang term that's wrong or have somebody eating the wrong food in the wrong region and haven't bothered to research any more than I want to get the wrong number of rounds in a gun. And so for me, what it really comes down to is taking space from all the discordant cultural noise of everything being political and finding a small, still place within myself where I'm acquainted primarily with the code of my craft and my love for that craft and my want to get everything right and to bring out a resonance and creativity that feels real and engaging to people.
Yeah, I actually think that's a really excellent way of looking at it, as opposed to, again, people are searching for rules so that they don't have to think about things. And that's where you get statements like, well, is that your story to tell? Which I always find very strange when you're writing fiction, because it's like, well, I made it up, so yeah. I mean, if I make up a story, then
Philip, just to
tell.
give you backdrop on this, Philip had a near cancellation event happen about 6 months ago there was a whole cadre of space octopi who were like outraged at his decision to take that on.
Well, the problem was that I said that mathematics was a sea in which Pitt swam. And they said, we don't swim. And it's like, I'm writing this for human beings.
But how do look, no one wants to read stories about, like if I only wrote characters that had my basis and background, how ridiculous is that? And also, who's to say that I even know what I think, right? Like we don't know what we think. So what am I supposed to write, like a series of stories about like, Jewish kids from Northern California who, like when people talk about write what you know, I always think that's such bad advice. It's like write what interests you. So much of what I know is from me moving into and following things that I was passionate about or that sparkled to me or that intrigued me. And so as I move into that, it's like, now I know about mind control cults because for one of my books, I got obsessed with it and I went undercover into mind control cults. And I wanted to figure out all the psychology. Like, we should be striving for new things to know. And I think in a lot of ways, if you're writing different characters, my rule is, I didn't even know that this was a rule till this moment. But if I'm writing somebody from a different culture than mine, I want to know and I want to have a rich, textured sense of that culture, and I want to love and have affection for that culture, and then I want to write about it with complexity or a different cultural person. And look, I have a certain advantage in that sense. My mother worked in international adoption. She placed over 2,000 children from all around the world, every size, shape, level of health, black, brown, green, orange, purple, kids from all around the world and all kinds of different families. And so I grew up, like, my house was like the UN growing up. I had a huge amount of exposure to different cultures. And I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, so it was a very open, liberal background that was really flourishing. And so I think a lot of times for anything, if you're writing, you want to bring respect to any culture or to any background of a character. And bringing respect does not mean making them saints. I wrote early in my career, I had a lot of characters would appear in the books who were gay, just because that's a big part of my family, my background. As I said, I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. And it was really funny because when I was writing them, I actually did an interview with The Advocate about this as a straight writer who'd written a certain number of gay characters. And at the time, this was early days, not early days, but it wasn't as prevalent in the culture and the representation as now. But a lot of the gay characters and lesbians were like sainted figures, right? Like in, Melrose Place. Everyone was like opening orphanages and like behaving perfectly and beautifully. And to me, that's a different form of disrespect almost, to not just paint all characters with, their wicked streaks and their holes and shadows. And I think about this a lot when people talk about write strong women. It's like, no, write super complicated women. Write super complicated men. Write super complicated characters.
I completely agree. It was interesting to have a student. We were talking about the film about the composer Tar. We were talking about Tar, which I thought was pretty amazing. And this is a gay woman. She's like, yeah, it was really great, but why did we have to have the gay woman be a sexual predator? And I'm like, I think, doesn't that mean you've come a long way? Isn't that good? That you're no longer like the gay best friend or this or that. You have a lead who's an anti-hero, who's, it's like, again, it's weird. And I guess this is where I think sometimes it's hard in the sense that, if as a white guy, you're sitting there going like, yeah, be a villain, be this, be that. It's like, because we've got we've got the heroes, we got this, we've been everything. So it's like, there's no desire to be, I don't have a desire to see representation, but I can see when other people do, but then I'm going like, do you really not want to have?
Well, part of this too is also, I'm the co-president of International Thriller Writers, and one of the things we've made a lot of effort towards is to put the international into that, right? And to find, I always think there's such richness of storytelling, right? In different communities, in different ways, different angles in to stories from, and so that, one of the things is if you search, you can find sort of excellence in representation, excellence in talent, right? In all these other communities. I think a lot of it is having your eyes open to want to discover something that is joyful and thrills you, right? And we found that a lot. We've reached out to, African writers, what are the different communities? What are writers in all sorts of different areas and regions? And it's exciting. There's Yasmin Ingo is a thriller writer, is wonderful. She's gone in American and she writes an assassin series. And I did an event with her, and it's really fun for me to see her straining, an assassin series, right? That's it's the first book's called Her Name Is Night. Through a different lens, and you're just on this exploration. It's delightful and it's different. and it's a different view of that world, the background of that kind of world, and the considerations of that character. There's different journeys you can go on, you know. And I think the biggest thing is, do we approach it with joy and optimism and delight? And you can tell when the writer does, and then if the writer does, then you do as well.
So, because Maddie specifically said where we get our ideas from, and this goes right into that. Discovering a thing that you didn't know you didn't know. Exciting?
Oh, the best.
Right.
Painful.
Exactly.
Sometimes painful, but the best. What is our timing? Because I want to leave some room for questions.
Yeah, so we have probably about 5 more minutes for discussion, and then we'll have time for questions.
Excellent. Okay.
Yeah.